As the dust settles on City Skylines 2 Economy 2.0 patch, Colossal Order came out swinging today. Detailers Patch Part 1, adding some vitally needed, necessary and slightly more affordable city service and building options. 27 of them in total. In this video, I'm going to showcase them all to you, including this wonderful new urban high school, as well as break down some of the known issues, continuing office issues, and other changes in today's patch update. Let's jump in. Starting with the new content, the bulk of the update, both somewhat surprising but also necessary for the new way that City Skylines 2 functions. First and foremost, if you're a roundabout fiend like me, congratulations everybody, we now have a whole load more options. As you can see, most of them focus around what's actually in the middle of the roundabout. Will it be illuminated? Will it be grass, concrete, and what about those decorative trees? The zoning options around them work okay, although there is a bit of free land that is often left, just as there used to be, of course, with a round road. However, there's also another new function that you could use. Indeed, you will have played with this kind of thing if you've played with mods before, of course. This is the surface tool. There are 2 for concrete, grass and pavement and sand, and 3 tiled surfaces. You place them down just like you would if you've been using mods so far in City Skylines 2. They tend to work pretty well. Of course, you don't just have to use it for urban development. We can now actually place sand on the beaches, adding to that beachfront properties saga. Speaking of which, let's take a look at the palm trees, because a tree tool has made its way into the official version of City Skylines 2. An age selector has been added to the tree placement tool, so you'll be able to get different shapes and sizes of trees and obviously spam them out far and wide, because it's the best way to make a crappy city look just slightly better. Please ignore those heinous edges in between the tiles there. Moving swiftly along to the next change, this one more economical. In fact, all of the rest of them will be. There's now a new option, 27 of them actually. New service buildings. The first one, the small water tower, roughly half the price in upkeep and spend. Next, again, sticking with the theme, a small medical clinic. This obviously gives you an option to actually provide a service to your people early on without maybe bankrupting your city. It will make the early game easier if you're providing medical care thanks to its reduced cost. Of course, it has reduced capacity as well, potentially down to about a quarter of what now looks like a ginormous medical center as I bring it into the game here next to the new one. But nonetheless, this will again be a great way to save money and space in a fledgling city. However, it's really not alone. This trend continues, but this time with a new twist. Something we've also been talking about a lot is how the service buildings don't have enough physical aesthetic variety, and now they do. Here you can see the fire station, the new urban fire station, obviously a sort of 4 or 5 story square building. Moving into the education sector, and there's a lot more love here too, with both an urban elementary school as well as a smaller version. So education gets the treatment of the medical center with a small cheap one, and of fire and police, by the way, with an urban version. Here you can see the high schools, small on the left, urban on the right. I particularly like that urban high school, but of course, the small one here will provide that extra economic functionality. The big one, honestly, I'm a big fan. The Sky Bridge is probably what does it for me though. Moving swiftly along, and speaking of those police stations, there are 2 new options inside. Again, a smaller one, as well as the urban option. Generally, you'll save a bit of space. I quite like the urban one, and of course, loads of these things can be upgraded, particularly the urban options, which tend to have extension wings, helicopter pads on their roof, that kind of thing. Finally, if you're struggling like Britain with its postal service, maybe you might want a small post office. This little bad boy, as you can see, can be popped down just about anywhere to provide a postal service to your city with one handy additional upgrade. Probably not a massive priority for you, but it's nice to have the option there nonetheless. Speaking of options, there are now 6 new public transport buildings following along with a similar theme, providing smaller options for accessibility, transporting people around the map, generally speaking. However, the public transport options aren't the only changes. They may be making their way to some of the brand new parks inside of City Skylines 2. Obviously, these are aesthetic, but they also provide some real benefit. Outdoor recreation, for the most part, aesthetics, obviously too. Here we have 5 total new options, from the very small leisurely city park right the way up to some interesting ones with interesting shapes. There's a rounded park, there's also a wonderful sort of connecting park, this one here. Probably my personal favourite to bridge perhaps slightly too wide city blocks. And so this brings us to 22 of the new service variations talked about and covered. There are some more parks. If you don't like green spaces but instead you prefer to park a car, then I've got great news for you, America, with in fact 6 new parking lots added to the game. Generally going with the kind of theme we've already seen. Smaller, cheaper options. Or options that bridge a slightly different shape than we're used to, like narrower, wider parking lots, more covered options, motorcycle options, that kind of thing. And this rounds out the new content, somewhat surprising and quite necessary for Cities 2. Now let's move through and quickly talk about the rest of the changes for the patch, gameplay fixes, which I'll throw up onto your screen if you're looking for something in particular. I would note that the very first one is that they've fixed offices downscaling their amount of workers until they only have 5 out of 5 workers. Industrial company worker max amount was also fixed because it wasn't updating properly, and a series of other fixes, including citizens spending their remaining in their teens for their whole life, as well as a bunch of other UI things. Speaking of which, here is a list of the headlining UI changes. I won't spend too much time on these ones. We'll move swiftly along to modding changes, which also feature here, again fairly heavily, with new abilities to set keyboard modifiers to mouse controls, and the ability for mods to create bindings themselves, as well as a variety of support, formatting, and bug fixing issues. And finally, in this lightning fast section, Paradox Mods was updated to version 1.6, as well as a couple of other things around the edges. Support for subscribe to all missing dependencies when on mod details view, and a bug fix that prevented multiple unsubscribe clicks on the same mod. Small things around the edges. It's good to see the platform receiving a little bit of love, at least. Now onto a section arguably slightly more important, known issues. First up, remember that small post office from earlier? Well, it doesn't actually receive any incoming mail to distribute in the city. Might want to keep that in mind. On offices, office companies will recover from the 5 out of 5 worker count, but it will be slow and only providing that they're able to actually make a profit in the city. We have seen progress. Will it be enough? I don't know. Speaking of office companies, they may not leave the city as they should when their building's removed. If you're still seeing offices stuck at 5 out of 5 or continuously losing workers, they are likely stuck. Literally stuck. You can, however, force them out of the city if you wish, with a little bit of a workaround. And this is what it looks like. Basically, crank the taxes up to full. Let the simulation run until all of the office buildings are empty, about a month of in-game time. You can see them, they'll be shown as grey, or use the info view. Once all of the companies have left your city, set the tax back to whatever it should be, how you'd prefer, and then new companies will start to populate. One final note on this point, you will likely not see any office demand for a while, as you have many empty office buildings already. It's completely normal and office demand will return, they say, with time as those existing buildings start to fill up. The office issue is such a sticking point and obviously still a known issue, that's why it's inside of this section, that they elaborate on it just a little bit further. As an alternative that preserves office demand, you can also remove all office zone in your city. Let the simulation run until you have no tax from the offices, and then zone offices again. A little bit more of a straightforward option. Either way, it seems like the office dilemmas haven't been completely solved, but we have some fixes, at least. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of this update video. I set up this little city new content tier to try out the new content. It's running at the moment at about 25,000 people, and running very well. Though, of course, the familiar story of my cities lagging at around 150,000 people is absolutely true. When you see B-roll from other cities, it's generally way sped up because the game is just running too slowly. But putting that to one side, what do you think about these new changes? Generally speaking, I really like them. I mean, who's going to complain about more buildings in cities too? It desperately needed some more aesthetic diversity, and now that the economy has changed, it also needs cheaper options so that cities can get started without being, totally bankrupt, and also purchasing unnecessarily large services. As always, happy to have a discussion in the comments section down below. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time. Oh, and P.S. They also added 4 vehicles, 3 of them for North Americans, and a European cargo train engine. How did they do it? It must have been so hard.